Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us today for an information session about the California Library Literacy Services 2019 to 2020 Annual Final Report. We are recording this session, so please know that if you turn your camera or microphone on, you will likely appear in the recording. I'm joined today by two colleagues, Anne-Lee Roman, the State Library's Literacy and State-Funded Grants Coordinator, and Jane Cook, Project Advisor on our Literacy Initiatives project. We will begin the session with a presentation before opening up to your questions. If you have questions, please stay on mute and put them in the chat box. After the presentation, we'll go through the chat and answer as many questions as we can. And if we aren't able to get to yours before the end of the session, we'll follow up with you afterwards. The due date for completing your report this year is Friday, November 13th. And if you have any questions about completing your report, Anne-Lee is here to help. She can be reached at annlee.roman@library.ca.gov. Much of the report is the same as the last several years, so it should look very familiar to many of you who've completed it before. If you haven't, and if you have any questions about items we don't cover today, please do let us know. Today, we'll highlight the new items that are on the report. So this includes questions about your activities, successes, and challenges during the pandemic, services to incarcerated people, the connection between mobile library literacy services and family literacy services, an expanded family literacy services section, and narrative sections in the financial and staff commitment sections. Anne-Lee will go over the COVID-19 related questions in a moment, but I just want to highlight this item on the CLLS report in counting opinions. There is a question at the start of the report that asks you whether or not you've completed the COVID-19 questions, which are in a separate SurveyMonkey form. Please be sure to complete the questions in SurveyMonkey and then check the yes box. You won't be able to submit your CLLS report until this box is checked. So last year, we asked you to begin reporting how many of your learners are incarcerated. You can find that new question in section 3 of the report. The number of learners who are incarcerated should be a subset of the total number of learners you serve, not a separate number. So if 120 learners received tutoring and 15 of these were incarcerated, your total number of learners would still be 120, and your reported number of learners who are incarcerated would be 15. Okay, what's new with MLLS? After consulting with the field, we've combined MLLS with the new Family Literacy Services program. We heard from you that your MLLS vehicles tended to serve families that are eligible to be part of the new Family Literacy Services program, and having MLLS and Family Literacy Services separate just caused confusion. So this year and in the future, we'll ask you to please report your MLLS program in the Family Literacy Services section of the report, and the same will apply next year for the CLLS annual application form. You'll see that the family literacy section is expanded from previous years. It's a kind of halfway step towards the changes you'll see in next year's annual final report. We're asking you to describe your programming for learners who are enrolled in your CLLS program and their families, and your outreach activities and your programming for adults who are eligible to be enrolled in your CLLS tutoring program, but who aren't currently enrolled, and their families. We want to see your outputs, how many enrolled adult learner families you served, and how many other eligible people you served, how many programs you provided, how many outreach events and activities you hosted, how many trainings you provided, how many other trainings staff attended, for example, trainings presented by the State Library, and how many books and other items you gave away. And because the reporting period includes March through June this year, which was during the pandemic, we know that some of your programming might have been online. So please definitely include and report that. There's nothing in the report that says that you can only report on activities that took place in person. And as a reminder, we have included the MLLS sections in the family literacy sections because of the close connections between those two programs. And one more reminder, the family literacy questions will change again next year to their permanent form based on the new framework and the work that Amy Prevedel did with many of you last year. And now I'm going to hand it over to Anne-Lee.
Okay, so one of the things that we is new, but that we also noticed, it was new on the applications, but we noticed that people kind of struggled with exactly what it was for, is the narrative boxes, which are found in 4 sections of the annual final report, in the financial section, in the staff and contracted staff FT for your adult and family literacy services programs, in the section where you address any LE, ESL, or other services in that financial section, and as well as the staff FT reporting for those sections. So those boxes should be used just to provide additional information on how your funds were spent. So an example would be if you have funding for staff, how many staff, full or part-time, were funded? Did you make decisions based to include additional staff or decrease staff? Or, for example, if you can see I circled right there, if you have library literacy materials funding, how many materials did you buy? What did you decide to buy? What was the need for that? So just kind of an expansion on what's going on with your program. These are not the spaces to explain when you get those little red spots, which we'll address later, that are asking about 20% differences in funding. Those are in a different area. So these are just to expand on your program. So these, in this section, we're going to be addressing just a few items that seem to need some extra explanations. They were either things that people had struggled with on past reports, or that people brought up as items that could be confusing. So as you can see, it's just the partners and what constitutes a partner, what's included in the FTE sections, and then that explanation of 20% difference from previous years. So the first one is partner. A partner is any group outside of your library that you work with. So that would include friends groups, other government agencies, businesses, but it would not include departments within your library or partnerships with other libraries. You can include groups that you work with on a short-term basis. I know some people had a little trouble identifying their partners because they were thinking of only people that they'd worked with on long-term projects. So for an example, a group that you partnered with for a short-time project or event would count as a partner. But of course, we'd want to try to keep in touch with those people and expand those partnerships into ongoing things. One disclaimer for this, the examples of partners, these are just some examples. They're not all the possible partners that you can have. So we've already received a question about the library personnel and contracted staff section because it says total CLLS programs. Somebody did ask if this was just the state funded or if it included all state and local funding. So this section is for all of your library and contracted personnel that are funded both by state and by local funds. There's that section. And then people noticed on the application that there were sections that popped up as requests for information to expand on differences in numbers. So either 20% more than in previous years or 20% less than in previous years. And so these sections are not errors in your report. It's not something that you have to correct. It's just something that we're asking for additional information. We did go through and reduce the number of places that these explanations are required within the report because we noticed that people were getting requests to explain the same numbers over and over again. So these will pop up if your numbers are 20% more or less than in your last annual report. If you have local funds that are less than the $18,000 local contribution, they will also ask for an explanation of that. And then if you have a change in programming, so say if you were providing family literacy services that you hadn't provided before, it would ask for an explanation of that change as well. So if you get one of these little boxes, I put in a screenshot of an example that's triggered. So the number that you see, so the request for explanation is always going to appear directly below the place where the explanation is needed. So because this says item C, total volunteer hours, 200,000, and it's saying that it has an over 20% difference, then the 670 that you see there, that's just showing you the number that it's being compared to. So you would just put your explanation in that little notepad right there, and it doesn't have to be, explanations don't have to be very complex, they just reflect the difference. So for something like this, it could be as simple as people had less access to the program because of COVID-19 closes. The requests for explanation do look a little bit different in the financial report section. They still will normally come right underneath the line where they're needed, and they will only be asking for explanations on the totals. So in this one, you can see it's asking for an explanation on your contracted staff because there is a 20% difference, and you would just put the note in the total. It should not be asking you for any explanations in any of the other columns. And now I'm going to pass it back to Natalie.
Thank you, Annalie. Okay, before we move on to the COVID-19 related questions, we wanted to take a moment to remind you about some of the additional changes you'll see on next year's final annual report, not this report, and which are affecting how you collect data now. So you'll see changes in how you report your learners and your volunteers' demographic data. As a reminder, we've changed our reporting categories for several reasons. To be more inclusive of the community, to be clearer about the option that learners and tutors have not to respond to the demographic questions, and for the race and ethnicity questions to align with the census so that we can compare the communities we serve with the community data that's reported in the census. You'll also see continued changes in family literacy reporting as we start using the new family literacy evaluation framework. And we'll start asking you to report on the new goals in the roles and goals framework, and to report on not just whether a person met or did not meet a goal, but also whether a person made progress towards a goal. And we've sent out information on the listserv about the changes, and we will continue to do that. And the information you need to collect, the information about the data that you need to collect for next year's report is on the libraryliteracy.org website. But if you have any questions about the changes that are coming up and the way you should be collecting data right now, please don't hesitate to let us know. So, okay, on to the COVID-19 related questions. So you'll see that we've added questions relating to the pandemic to this year's annual final report. And I would first like to thank the members of the CLLS task force who helped to develop these questions and make sure that they were relevant and resonated with coordinators and staff in library literacy programs. We're asking you to complete the questions in SurveyMonkey because they are slightly different from the usual questions in the final report. And you must complete the questions before submitting the annual final report in Counting Opinions. So Annalie's going to take a closer look at the questions, but before she does, I do want to emphasize that the questions are all intended to help us get a full picture of what happened in your programs because of the pandemic. We want to hear all about the challenges so that we can do our best to help you. And we want to hear about everything you did and the services you provided and how you supported your learners so that we can tell your story and best represent all the work that happened this summer and that's continuing into the fall. The questions have not been created to guide funding decisions. They're included so that you can tell us what's happening in your programs right now, so that we can celebrate all of the positives and we can help with the challenges. And we know from hearing from many of you anecdotally that lots of changes have taken place. And also lots of very positive and important things have happened. And the final report form simply couldn't capture this information. It's amazing just how much everyone has done given the extreme circumstances caused by the pandemic. And we wanted to gather this information so that we can use it to document your successes and your stories and fully represent the work that you're doing. And now over to Anne-Lee, who will take a look at the questions.
So first, before I start, I wanted to just let you guys know these sections are broken down into section A, B, and C. When you open up the SurveyMonkey, it doesn't have separate sections. We just did this for purposes of differentiating between the kinds of information that we're going to be asking you. So, number estimates versus yes or no questions. So section A is just kind of the introductory section. It's going to ask you for information on the person filling out the survey, and then it's mostly going to be number estimates. So you should just provide your best estimates. We know we didn't ask you in advance to collect information on these items. So we're not holding you to, you have to know exactly what your numbers are, but just your best estimates of various aspects of your literacy program and kind of how you've been functioning through the pandemic situation. So it'll be estimates of learner involvement, estimates of tutor involvement, estimates on your items that you've given away or items that you've loaned. So I've kind of put a couple of question examples just to kind of give you an idea if you haven't opened the survey of things that would be asked. So these questions, so the first question number 2 is please report the number of learners who, and then it has various items. So who've continued learning with a tutor, who've continued learning mostly independently, who've continued learning with no support from their tutor, who are on pause. And these questions will also mirror the kinds of questions that we're asking regarding tutor participation as well. So how many tutors have continued, how many have continued, independently with some check-ins, how many have taken a pause, questions like that, just to kind of gauge the participation of your learners and your tutors during this time. And then question 4, please report the number of items your program has given away. This question is to focus on items that you've given away to participants for them to keep. So books or digital devices or other non-digital learning related items. So section B is all pretty much yes or no questions that are related to kind of your activities and observations and purchases. We want to make sure that you're checking yes pretty much for anything that you've done, because we're trying to capture, it doesn't have to be something that you've done on a continuous basis. If you, gave away items once and then didn't do it again, we still would want you to check yes that you did that. So we want to make sure you are reporting on all items, all the activities that are related to your literacy program. So whether they're funded with the state funds or with local funds. There are a few questions where we've included things that say we're working on it, and most of those have areas that you can add descriptions for kind of what you're doing, what your process is, the things that you're trying to implement. And so we'd appreciate it if you'd fill out those descriptions just so we can get a sense also of what you're trying to implement. And then there are some questions relating to staff, and so we want to make sure you include full and part-time staff when you're answering those questions. So a couple of examples again from this section. Question 7 is asking about, increased purchases of licenses or seats or applications or online learning things. So an example would be if you purchased access to an online course or a program and the vendor sold you seats to that program, that's something that you would include. Again, question 9, and have you increased purchases of copyable items that you've been able to give out to learners or tutors that aren't able to access online? Another question, and we have questions like this about staff and tutors, kind of their observations. And, again, this is just the information that you have and that you've been hearing. We know some of you may not have a full accounting of feedback from especially tuners or things like that at this point. So have you observed them developing new digital literacy skills, and then kind of asking for descriptions of what you've been observing. And then question 20, has the library extended Wi-Fi access to local communities? And some examples of this could include loaning hotspots. It could include a Wi-Fi bus. It could include boosting existing coverage so that, you know, people can come, or leaving your Wi-Fi on after hours so people could come into your parking lot, things like that. So just this is kind of just an example of some of these kinds of questions. And then you can see here, it has the "we're working on it" and a space for you to give a further explanation of what you've been doing. And then, you know, question 24, we do ask questions about staff and what they've been doing. Have program staff been redeployed to work elsewhere in the city or county? And be sure to include your full and part-time staff as well when you're asking these questions, just to get a sense on fully what's going on with your program, what activities you've been doing, how your staff has been impacted, all of that information. And so now I'm going to pass it back over to Natalie, who's going to talk about the final section of the survey.
Thanks, Anne-Lee. Okay, so section C goes back to what I mentioned at the start of this section of the presentation. Please do tell us your story or stories in your own words and let us know how the pandemic has impacted your program and your community. In question 30, you can tell us about the new or modified activities that are taking place as a result of the pandemic. So answers might include adults using digital devices and developing skills to help their children with online learning, staff preparing and hosting workshops to help learners through this time, and helping people to build resilience or navigate their way through the pandemic. We've heard those stories anecdotally, and it would be great to have those written down and submitted and documented in this survey. In question 33, we want you to describe the positives that have happened this summer. So for example, they might be new connections that were made, or examples where learner leaders emerged in your community, or any new partnerships that have been formed. And of course, as always, the end of the survey provides space for you to tell us anything that hasn't really fit into one of the questions or sections earlier on. And so that is our overview of the report. And so now what we are going to do is take a look at the questions that have come up in chat. If you have additional questions as we go along, please do type them in. There's a lot of us on right now, and so we just thought it would probably be best if everyone stays on mute and the questions go into the chat. So the first one I see is the slide deck going to be available, and Holly, thank you, answered that one. Yeah, the slide deck and the recording will be available after this session. It's also really important to remember that that what we went through was just highlights and pieces from the really comprehensive final report guide that Anne-Lee's put together for everybody. And we know that that's a super long document, but that's because ideally everything is explained in there. So it's all in there. So this will all be available, but we do recommend that you use the guides that Anne-Lee's put together for completing the report, and it should go a lot more smoothly that way. Okay, other CLLS libraries could not be partners, is that correct? That is correct. I mean, obviously, it's really important that CLLS program staff are liaising with their networks, working with their networks, and that's kind of a given that we expect to be happening. We are talking about partners outside of the library, outside of the program that you're connecting with in the community. Another question that came through just to me is, do we need to answer the SurveyMonkey questions in one sitting? And that is a great question, because we did not address that, and we should have done. You do unfortunately have to do that. So what we would suggest is having the questions prepared and next to you when you're ready to put the answers in, and do it all in one sitting, because it is a frustrating thing and we apologize for that. And but it is unavoidable at the moment, unfortunately. And so so are we to answer question number 2 for the time period between March 2020 and June 2020? And actually, I think I saw Carrie Scott, who was on our task force. Thank you, mentioned that. I think so. I'm not sure about, well, as a whole, not just question 2, but the COVID related questions are for the period March 19th through September 19th, 2020. So this is kind of it's an adjunct to the full final report. So it goes beyond the end of that reporting period. And it is for the period when the pandemic really hit and everything closed down through September 19th. We will likely be doing a similar adjunct report next year to continue capturing this information. The CLLS full final report, as always, just captures activities in the fiscal year. So that's July 1 to June 30th. We know that some of you encumber funds and some of your funds actually get expended beyond that period, but it is the actual July 1, June 30th fiscal year activities that we need reported on in this report. Yep, again from Elaine. So yes, through September 19th would be great. Thank you. For the Wi-Fi question, is that the library in general is working to provide this, or if the literacy program specifically is? If your library did this, you can report that you did that. Thank you, because it's not necessarily something that we would expect the literacy program to do, but it's something that was part of what the library was doing. So thank you, Chelsea, for asking that. MLLS questions, is it correct that I only answer questions G to O if we have a mobile vehicle? Yeah, only answer the MLLS questions if you do provide services, mobile library literacy services. You don't have to answer them. And so you should be able to submit without answering those. And if you can't, let us know and we will fix that.
Yeah, as long as you've checked no, you don't have a mobile vehicle in that one question, you should be able to submit. If you check yes, then it will ask you to go back there.
Thank you, Anne Lee. Okay. If a literacy site is a library from a different system, does it count as a community site or a library site? Good question. It is a community site simply because the system is preloaded with all of your numbers for your actual documented from your public library survey number of outlets. And so you could get into the situation where you would document more library sites than your library actually has. And then the system can't calculate the percentage of your sites that offer literacy services. So in this instance, it would count as a community site, but you can add that in a notes field and clarify if you would like to. Would it be possible to provide the final report document as an Excel spreadsheet? That would be so helpful for our reporting tabulation. That is a great question. That is something that we could look into for next year. It's probably not something that we can do this year, but we will definitely look into that for next year if you would find that more helpful, and perhaps put all the notes in Excel and have one big document in Excel. Do we count digital tutoring as a location for tutoring services? I'm going to say probably not this year, but I think that's something you would put as a note as something that changed in your COVID report. And it's probably something we're really going to have to address for next year. If anyone disagrees with that, because it is not clear, we can discuss that in the chat, and we could work through that. But I'm thinking not at this point, but something that we have to work through moving forward. The budget should just be your award and the funds that you contributed for this this fiscal year. So it is your fiscal year award. It's the amount that you were awarded, even if all your expenditures weren't fully expended before June 30th. You'll see that the report asks for expended and encumbered funds. And so it is the award that you were given for the 2019-2020 fiscal year. In prior years, we were asked how many hours of training were required to become a tutor. Now we're asked about the number of hours volunteer tutors spent in training, including training provided for new tutors, nor training provided for tutors. Does this include prospective tutors who did not go on to be matched, or only tutors who actually got matched and therefore are official tutors? All right, Carrie. I think if you provided training for a tutor, you should count it because it was an activity that you did. Whether the person was able, and again, probably very unusual year if when you know, COVID hit and everybody closed down and the library doors were closed and people perhaps could not become tutors as planned. But if you provided a training, you should count that training.
And you can add a clarifying note stating that, you know, however many hours were provided tutors who haven't been matched yet or something like that.
Is there a way to print out the survey questions so we can prepare responses for entry? Absolutely. Anne-Lee sent out the questions as an attachment to the message that went to the listserv. If you need Anne-Lee to resend that to you, just drop her an email and she can do that for sure. For one training of 2 hours with 5 tutors, that is, you have provided 10 hours of training. Yes. All right. And the calculation of the training hours should be in the explanations that Andy sent.
And I just put my email address in the chat just in case anybody needed it.
Okay, does anybody have any more questions on the final report or the special COVID report? Okay, well, thank you very much. If you have any questions as you fill it out, we are here to help. Don't hesitate to ask us, especially the really difficult questions, because that helps us work through improving the report for future years, because we know things are really changing. So sometimes the questions that we've used for many years just aren't going to be so relevant. So we will be very mindful of that. And if there's anything, as Annalie says, needs clarifying notes, then please tell us. Oh, we have one question come in. No tutoring is taking place in the jail and staff are not allowed to meet with students. We had in March. It seems making all students and tutors as left instead of indicating them as on pause. What is your feeling? Yeah, that's a really interesting one. I feel like you wouldn't necessarily, I think left doesn't mean they're never going to come back, but I think there is a difference between somebody's told you they're on pause right now because they don't feel comfortable coming in, but they're still connected with you, as opposed to somebody that you just haven't heard from at all. So if it's a program in the jail and you know that those people are still connected with your program and they will still be coming back, those are on pause because you know. But there's just a difference between people that you know will be coming back and the ones you just haven't heard from due to COVID. And Diane asks, can we fill out the SurveyMonkey before we finish the final report? Absolutely. Yes, you can do that whenever you like. The earlier the better. Okay, well, thank you. I think that's the end of this part of the presentation. So thank you very much. And definitely let us know if there's anything you need. Thank you.